Welcome in and welcome back. We are here with another review for WandaVision, as we will be doing every week here on the channel. So if that is something in which you might be interested, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button, because we will be doing it for every WandaVision episode, just like we did for both seasons of The Mandalorian. So where do we begin with this episode? I'm not 100% sure. There were a lot of nods to the X-Men. There were unfortunately no questions answered. Just a couple questions that have been reposed, perhaps. I will not say that this was a filler episode, but it definitely felt like an episode between episodes. It didn't feel like we had it felt like a whole lot of bridge. It didn't feel like we had a whole lot of definitive stuff going on. We did maybe get an answer as to whether or not this is actually Quicksilver or not, but maybe we did not. It is hard to say that Wanda would have treated someone who she thought was actually her brother in the way that she treated him at the end of this episode. Spoilers. I should have said spoilers. I've got to get better at saying that at the very beginning of these episodes. But the very first thing that we notice when this episode starts, did we get a Malcolm in the Middle beginning? Was Malcolm in the Middle 90s? If anything, it had to have been 98, right? It had to have been late 90s, because I know it was on in the early aughts. Malcolm in the Middle, by the way, extremely underrated. Does not get anywhere near the amount of praise that it should. It had some of the most ingenious, absolutely ingenious ploys for a sitcom that I have ever seen. My very favorite scene ever from a Malcolm in the Middle episode. The boys are all in their room, and I can't remember his name as the father, but the father comes in and says, "Who wants to make $50? And they all look at each other. "Who wants to make $60? For what? Who wants to make $60 to be a good boy?" And they're kind of hesitant, and no one says anything. All of a sudden, the door opens downstairs, and you hear Lois scream, "Oh my God! Who wants to make $100? And no one says anything. "Who did this?" Lois screams. "Who wants to make $120? And Dewey raises his hand. And the dad says, "You're a good son." So he picks him up and he backs out of the door and says, "I got him, honey." Most ingenious little scene I have ever seen in a sitcom. That was brilliant. So it really excited me to see that this episode was starting with Malcolm in the Middle. I thought that we were going to get a lot more of the sort of sitcom, situational comedy type stuff, but we didn't really. By the way, what is with Agnes and butts? Have you noticed that? When she's very first introduced in this series, she watches the postman's butt as he walks by, and in the beginning of this episode, the camera zooms in on her butt. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I have to believe, I don't know, have we had a red herring here with Agnes? I have been thinking that she was outside of the loop and another witch this entire time. But it seems strange that there are certain characters who are completely in the zone, like Norm, that works with Vision, couldn't break out. But Agnes can, and she says, "Do you want us to reset?" And so did the guy dressed as Frankenstein in this episode. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But he says, "Would you like me to change something?" So at certain times, it seems that characters in this world are able to sort of break free or break out of character, but at other times they are not. It was a very nice touch that at the boundaries of the town, as one would maybe suspect, the characters do not move very much at all. You see that one woman doing this, going to hang the ghost on the string of her Halloween decorations over and over again, but never getting there. And she cries as it's happening. At some level, it seems she is cognizant of those things going on in her life or not going on in her life. It seems that the subconscious of these individuals is still there. For example, when Vision broke Norm out of the state, out of the trance, he starts looking for a cell phone, wanting to call his sister, I believe it was. So it's interesting to see what is going on there. We had, I think, some references to other Marvel stuff as well as the X-Men. Number one, when Vision first comes down and the Evan Peters Quicksilver is talking to Wanda about the costume, he says to her, "You've probably suppressed a lot of the bad memories." That's a little on the nose, right? That's where we are with this series in general. That is the very essence of this series. That is the beginning, the genesis of this series. Another small reference, perhaps, to the X-Men that I think I noticed, but I'm not sure. The drone, which was recovered from the town, the drone which Wanda brought back out and threw at everybody, was that the Blackbird? It looked like, obviously it's not actually the Blackbird, but was it the shape of the Blackbird? It looked to me, just in brief, in passing, as if it was, if not the Blackbird, modeled on the Blackbird. But the big one that stood out was when Vision was trying to tell Wanda that he had to go be on the neighborhood watch tonight, and Vision was coming coming to save the day. Coming to the rescue. He said, "Don't worry, you need a father role model for these kids. I've got the XY chromosome." He has the XY chromosome. He's got the man behind it. But what we're talking about with X chromosome, and we're talking about the Marvel Universe, you're talking about chromosomes, you're talking about mutants. So I think perhaps quite a few references to mutants in this episode as well. Remember, when little Speed ends up figuring out he has powers, Quicksilver says to him, "A chip off the old Maximoff block," insinuating that they are from a lineage of people who have extraordinary powers. So I think that, look guys, if this episode ends up being cut a little bit short, I apologize. It is currently negative 11 degrees in Kansas City. And I live in a studio apartment, which means I have a window unit, which means that the longer this episode goes on, the longer I have to have my heat off in the apartment, which means that eventually it will be negative 11 degrees in my small studio apartment. So if it seems like I am motoring through things, I apologize. I want to bring up the idea. A couple small things noting on this episode. Kick-Ass. Both of the Quicksilvers were in Kick-Ass, right? And they, Quicksilver says, or no, Speed, I think, says, "Look, this kicks ass," referring to Evan Peters' character and the situation with getting candy. And then Wanda repeats, "Kick-Ass." Another thing, if you notice in the background, we get a small nod, really, to the 90s, as one of these kids was in a Sub-Zero costume. Maybe not officially Sub-Zero, but when you've got a ninja that has a blue mask and a blue garb on, it's Sub-Zero. And if it's not Sub-Zero, it's trying to be Sub-Zero. So it was interesting to see that. Did anyone else? So I'm 35 years old. I was born in 1985. I had massive flashbacks to the 90s with the cars and the Halloween costumes and the shiny material on all the Halloween costumes, things like that. It was a kick in the gut, right? It was interesting to see. One thing I want to... So I think we're moving on... Oh, one more small thing. Sorry. Evan Peters. Is it just me, or was he trying very hard to channel Jim Carrey in an homage to the 90s? Just in his facial expressions and delivery, things like that. But that, with Evan Peters, is where I want to start the actual big conversations about this episode. Evan Peters in this episode, is he Quicksilver or not? It was my opinion that what we were doing was we were getting Quicksilver from a different universe, because the show at the time was in the 80s. Quicksilver in the Fox stuff we last saw in the 80s. I thought there was a wormhole between the two. We were getting... Mephisto had just plucked a Quicksilver from a different timeline and sort of done the whole brainwash thing on him. I'm not sure. I really don't know at this point. Maybe Mephisto is Quicksilver, and he was confused. I mean, he's... Mephisto, I think, in the Marvel Comics, Mephisto is multidimensional. meaning that he exists in all the dimensions, or at least multiple of the dimensions, versus we have this Wanda for this dimension, we have another Wanda for another dimension, another Wanda for another dimension. Mephisto exists cross-dimensional. So I was assuming that maybe what was happening was Mephisto, in an attempt to appear as Wanda's brother, had appeared in this episode, or in this series, as the wrong Quicksilver, from the wrong universe, or dimension, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure exactly how they will be representing things. Timelines, on the wrong timeline. He chose the wrong timeline of Quicksilver in which to appear in this series. Makes me wonder, if we're talking about Mephisto, and we're talking about time travel, and we're talking about multi-dimensions, and we're talking about working with characters, it makes me wonder if we're getting Doctor Doom at some point soon. It really does. It makes me wonder if we're going to get, I hope, we get a Doom series. If you don't know Doctor Doom's origin, it is extremely interesting. It is extremely multifaceted. Doctor Doom is a character that would be on par with Thanos as a villain, but on par with Tony Stark as an interesting character. You get the right actor for Doom, for Doctor Doom, you've got a whole different dimension, ironically, to the things that are going on. When you're talking about Mephisto, if he is the Quicksilver character in this episode, talking about our parents, our parentage. Don't you remember Mother? Really gives me Mother from this strange Far East land, right? Really makes me think about the Doctor Doom character, talking about magic, all this stuff. God, I hope we get Doom. I hope we get a mini series on Disney Plus for Doctor Doom. God, I hope we do. That would be so great. I know that they have a little bit of a lineup for a little while out, but just put it in there, Feige. Just put it in there. I can't be alone on this. Doctor Doom, seriously, there are several, there's a lot of YouTube videos of Comics Explained type channels, which, by the way, if you're not subscribed to Comics Explained, you really should be. He does great work. But there are a lot of Doctor Doom's origin videos on YouTube. Just invest the 10, 15, 20 minutes in one of them and imagine how great that miniseries would be. Just fantastic. It would be fantastic. Moving on, we have Hayward. Hayward's not wrong. This stodgy white guy looking, he must be the bad guy because he's a stodgy white guy looking guy. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Wanda has thousands of hostages. And even if she doesn't, even if she's not the one who has them, they have no reason to know that. He's not wrong. That is absolutely the strategy one would take. And look, by the way, if we're talking about characters that are represented already in this MCU, who does he remind you of? If anyone, it should be Nick Fury. He is from the Nick Fury school of you know what you need to know. He's from that mold. He's from that school. One might suggest he is from the Hydra school of you know what you need to know. But that's also the Nick Fury school of you know what you need to know and no more. Which was, in retrospect, the reason the dynamic between Tony Stark and Nick Fury was so good. Because Tony Stark always knew more than he was supposed to know. Because he was Tony Stark. And he was an asshole. And if you told him he wasn't supposed to know something, by God, he was going to figure it out. That was the reason for the tension between Fury and Stark. It always was. It's what made that work. I am surprised to see it not pulled off in that fashion on this series. I have to get to one of my criticisms for this episode. The worst television style B plot in this episode, the worst television style acting in this episode is ironically coming to us from the people who are not on TV, from Wu, from Darcy, and Monica Rambeau. I don't know what it is, but a couple of these episodes now, their acting has been terrible. Maybe it's the directing. I know that you can have a great performance in the hands of a bad director and it becomes terrible. But if that is the case, then why is the stuff with Vision and Wanda so damn good? It's troubling. It's a troubling element, I have to say, because everything else in the series is so good. But in Monica started the series so good. But in the last few episodes, the scenes, and I will talk about the scripting as well, the scenes between these characters have been scripted so poorly, and again, so on the nose. Maybe it's just hard to deliver these lines in a convincing fashion. Darcy has been terrible the past, and I like the Darcy character from the Thor movies. I really do. Just been terrible in these episodes. I don't know what it is. You know, obviously, my opinion. But I don't understand what's going on there. I hope it shores up. I hope there is some explanation, but it's just weird. Two things left to talk about. Why the choice of Halloween? Why the choice of Halloween? Because in Halloween we are wearing false faces. Is this the entire commentary on the Quicksilver character? Quicksilver is there for Halloween. He shows up in order to take the kids trick-or-treating because it's a false face. We have to recognize that if this is not Quicksilver, it's still a superpowered individual. Quicksilver was racing the kids around in the same fashion that Quicksilver would have. So if it is not Quicksilver, we are still dealing with someone with superpowers. We've got to think about Mephisto. I think we've also got to wonder if we're dealing with Ultron. We saw Ultron die in Age of Ultron. But did we? We saw Ultron perish in that last scene with Vision, against whom he might hold some grudge. But being on the internet as Ultron was, perhaps he did not die. Being AI as he was, perhaps he found some way around that termination. And no, he does not have magical powers, but he would understand them. So I think we have to wonder if that's what we're doing here. I think we have to wonder, he would also, by the way, be holding a grudge against Wanda. So maybe the red herring that was Agnes is also the red herring that is Quicksilver, is also the red herring which would be Mephisto. I don't know. We are running out of... This is episode 6. We've only got 9 episodes. There's 3 episodes left. Awfully late in the series to have what felt a little bit like a filler episode, but I won't call it that. I promised I wouldn't. A little late in the series to have what felt like an episode between episodes. It was also a strange feeling to... I think we had less runtime here than we'd had last episode. It makes me wonder... The reports say that this series had been reconfigured, had been recut, re-edited, because there were supposedly, if you go back and you look at the trades, if you go back and you look at interviews, 6 episodes of this. Now we have 9. Makes you wonder how this recutting and reconfiguration went. This was, I think, a 30-minute runtime episode again. Versus last week we had, I think, a 40-some minute runtime episode. Interesting to see what's going on there. Interesting to note. But the last thing I want to talk about is the obvious hanging question that we have here, which, kudos to the episode. If you were going to leave it as a cliffhanger, kudos to the episode that it did not feel like a cliffhanger. We still don't know who is Monica's guy. Who is this guy that she has? I don't know. I don't know. There's speculation, obvious, that Reed Richards would be it. Speculation, obviously, about Professor X. I don't think it's either of those things. Maybe it's Hank McCoy. I don't know. Perhaps it could be some. I don't know. I don't know. We have the still obvious and still the idea is still hanging out there as well. I won't call it a hanging mystery because I don't think that it's ever been really presented in a question mark, but the idea of genetic and molecular recomposition, which might lead to the X-Men, who knows, but this idea of molecular recomposition on Monica Rambeau because she was in the Hex, but Monica Rambeau does not seem to be perturbed by it. So there's something happening there. But the obvious question, who is her guy, right? I don't know. If you are interested in this sort of review for something like WandaVision, maybe hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out here on the channel if you hit the like button as well. I am glad that you were here for this episode, for this review, and I hope to see you next time as well. I have new videos on this channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I also run a channel called Strip Cover Lit, which is about literature. It's about books, short stories, poetry, everything like that. Mondays are for poetry on that channel. So if you were interested in that sort of thing, follow me over there as well, and I hope to see you again next time.